Hello, everybody. It's Adrian Chenault, and I am without Tom Chenault, which is just a crazy, crazy thing. And yet, here I am this week on the Legacy Leadership Show, and I'm so glad to have you back with us for another great episode. And we have a real treat today. I am so excited for the guest that we have, and I'm going to tell you a little bit of the story of how Rowland and I got connected before I introduced him. If you watched last week, you may have heard that my dear old dad announced that Bob Bodine was going to be the guest on the show this week, which is funny because I said, I'm going to invite Bob. And he said, well, I'll just announce him, which is a very typical Tom Chenault move. And Bob wasn't able to join us this week. He's going to join us really soon. But Bob said, hey, I can't join you, but I've got the perfect guy for you. And he started telling me Rowland Hanson's story, which I'm so excited for you to get to hear. But one of the things that he told me, which just seems impossible, putting eyes on this man compared to my dear old distinguished friend Bob Bodine, is that Rowland was Bob's first ever, or maybe second ever, boss in the business, which is pretty cool. So these guys go back a long, long way. But Rowland Hanson is just an unbelievably accomplished marketer who has had a storied career across a ton of great brands, from Neutrogena to Nordic Track. I remember having a Nordic Track in my house as a kid. And maybe most notably, and something I'm super excited to hear the story of, he was a really early executive at Microsoft and has some incredibly cool stories of some of the experiences he had there. So we're going to talk about that. But also exciting is that Rowland has turned into somebody who's an incredible philanthropist. He and Bob are working on an incredible new project that relates to football, which is something near and dear to my heart. And so we've got a lot to talk about. And so Rowland Hanson, thanks for being here and welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Glad to be able to join you.
It is great to have you here. So would love to just have you start off telling us a little bit of your story. You have been a marketing exec at some of the most noteworthy brands in the world, household names, and not everybody gets to do that. And so let's just start there. How on earth did you manage to get to work for so many different cool companies?
Well, it was, look at and everything by the grace of God. I've been given, just unbelievable opportunities. I graduated from the Wharton School of Business with my MBA, and that was all the way back in Philadelphia. And I'm a kid that grew up on the beach in Southern California, so Philadelphia was not my favorite location, only because it wasn't on the beach.
Sure.
But I worked my way back west by starting. Then I got recruited by General Mills, and I was in the Betty Crocker division of General Mills. And I always say that's where I really learned marketing. That General Mills is a tremendous training ground for marketing.
Sure.
And I made it through 3 winters. I don't know if you know what the winters are like in Minneapolis, but when I say it's 40 below, I mean it's 40 below.
Thank you.
And again, I'm a kid that grew up on the beach in Southern California, and I had turned down an offer from a company, part of Nestle, Carnation Company, and I had turned down a brand management offer from them 2.5 years earlier. And going through my 3rd winter, I recontacted them and said, "Hey, listen, I'm kind of interested in reconsidering being out." And that brought me back to Southern California. So I ended up going through the ranks of Carnation and became a marketing director, and that's when I met Bob and really hired Bob to come work with me at Carnation Company. And then after, 4 to 5 years, I got recruited away by a really tiny company at the time. It was called Neutrogena Corporation. And Neutrogena was, the founder had inherited the business from his father-in-law. And he was an archaeologist by trade. And I became literally the first professional management at Neutrogena, and came in and we were fortunate to be able to build Neutrogena into a major brand. And as you probably know today, Johnson and Johnson owns Neutrogena, and it's become a multi-billion-dollar brand. But
Yeah.
we took it up and built the brand in such a way that it became a very attractive acquisition. And when I was deciding to leave Neutrogena, I was looking at different entrepreneurial ventures, and I got a call from a guy named Bill Gates. And Bill,
That rings a bell. I feel like I've heard that somewhere. Okay.
And I'll tell you, at the time, it was in very early stages of Microsoft. Yeah. And Bill, I kept on saying to Bill, I think you're talking to the wrong guy. I really don't know how you got my phone number, but I'm not a software guy. I'm not, and he said, listen, he goes, and he had been tracking the Neutrogena brand and what we did to build the brand. And he after, by the way, after several weeks, he finally convinced me to fly up from LA to Redmond, Washington, which for me, it might as well have been outer Siberia. I've been living on the beach again.
You don't strike me as a cold weather guy, Rowland.
I'm not a cold weather guy. And I got up there, and Bill and I just headed off. And he said, Rowland, he goes, I said, but Bill, he explained to me how big the software business was going to become and his vision of what it could be. And he got all done. By the way, it took like 4 or 5 hours doing this.
Sure.
And I got done, and I said to Bill, Bill, okay, I'm convinced you're going to take over the world, but I still don't understand why I'm here. And he looks at me and he goes, yeah, okay. Let me ask you a question. I said, okay. He goes, what's the difference between $1 per ounce facial moisturizer and $100 per ounce facial moisturizer? And I said, technically? And he said, yeah, technically. I said, technically nothing. He says, that's why I need you, because we need to build Microsoft into the dominant brand within this software industry that was exploding. He says, if you create the perception and I create the reality, nobody will ever beat us. And I was blown away that a technoid, and by the way, Bill was the ultimate technoid at the time. And by the way, I was the only non-technoid in the company, but I became convinced. And so I moved my family from Southern California up to Redmond, Washington. And Bill basically gave me carte blanche. He said, look, I'm not going to get you. He goes, I don't understand what you do. He goes, all I knew, the mission you have is build Microsoft into the brand of software, the preferred brand of software. And he goes, and I'll stay out of your way. And that's what I did. And so I, reported directly to Bill, and the rest is history.
Oh my goodness, that's a wild story. So, Rowland and I were talking before the show, and not to plug another podcast on the podcast, but I would say probably my favorite podcast in the world is this podcast called Acquired. And if you're into business, if you're kind of a nerd like me, if you like to go do activities and want something to listen to in the background because they are long episodes, this show is awesome. But they did like a 2 or 3 part series on the founding of Microsoft, and it was the most fast. I was completely blown away. And growing up in my generation, you take Microsoft for granted as being the behemoth that it is, in much the same way, actually, incidentally, that in my mind's eye, when I heard you had been with Neutrogena, I imagined the Johnson & Johnson version of Neutrogena and whatever that cute girl was who was in all the commercials when I was a teenager. That's the main thing I remember about Neutrogena. Or, it was always this big brand owned by a big conglomerate in my mind, but it wasn't always that. It takes a guy like you to do that and to help to put these brands on the map. But anyway, I'd love to hear, I loved hearing kind of the scrappiness and just the stories of how these guys kind of figured out how to navigate, the creation of an entire new world that just didn't exist. And they seized the moment, and the marketing was certainly part of it. But would love to just hear, a couple of stories of what it was like in those early days as you guys were trying, you were inventing a category and then having to brand into that category. But what did it look like to just, look out into kind of this open space and try to help consumers to understand even what it was that you guys were creating?
Well, that was the fascinating challenge of it, because, and if you, Microsoft at the time, I mean, I literally was the only person who had classic consumer marketing, experience, and they didn't, and truly, Bill said it point blank. He didn't understand what I do, and certainly nobody else in the company understood what I did.
Sure.
But but he gave me the opportunity. I mean, he said, "Look, do what you did at Neutrogena. Let's build Microsoft into the dominant brand." And there are some techniques, that you do, and too long a story for here, but I have a preferred strategy for building brands, and it's very applicable to any category, any product, any service. There's a way to build a brand, and you can make it really invulnerable to competition. And Bill gave me the opportunity to do that. It's so funny because one of the things that people always remember is that, we were not a leading software company when I was there. We were probably fourth or fifth.
Sure.
And then Bill brought me over to his office one day with all these developers in the room, and he's showing me this thing up on the wall because he said, "We're going to be launching this." And I said, "Wow, okay." I'm looking at it, and I said, "Well, so this is a new application?" And he goes, No. It's not an application. I said, "So it's a new operating system?" He goes, No. It sits on top of the operating system. He goes, then applications sit on top of it. I go, "Okay, well, what is it?" He goes, "Well, they call them GUIs, graphical user interfaces." And I said, "Wow." I said, "Well, does anybody else have a GUI?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, we're way late. IBM has its own GUI, VisiCorp, but by the way, it went away, but VisiCorp had its own GUI." There were like at least 5 or 6 well-established GUIs, and we're coming in late. And I said, "Well, Bill, let me go take a look at it, and I'll get back to you." And he said, "Oh, and by the way, the developers already have a name." And I said, "Okay, I thought that was my job, but what name do they have?" He
Sure.
said, "They want to call it Interface Office Manager." And I said, "Oh, okay." I said, "I'll tell you what, I'll take that under advisement." So I went back to my team and I said, "Guys, and by the way, this is before the internet. So we had paper publications, and there was Byte magazine and all these magazines, but they were paper." And I went to my team and I said, "Okay, each one of you takes a publication. For the next 2 weeks, I want you to get every one of the versions for the last year. And I want you to see, what are they saying about these GUIs? What are these GUIs? I mean, look, we got to educate ourselves."
Sure.
So They came back 2 weeks later, and we taped up all the articles around what we called the war room, and we taped them all up. Again, we had no internet, so I mean, this was all manual, and we're looking at this. I said, okay, let's look for commonality between these GUIs. And as we started going through how they were being described, well, they weren't calling GUIs, they were calling them windowing systems because they put windows on the screen. And I said, holy crap, if these are all windowing systems, there's only one name we can be. We've got to be Microsoft Windows. And we will reposition everybody as part of us. Well, that was the easy decision, other than I had to then argue with the developers, and Bill would not go against the developers. So I had to make again, way too long of a story, but I will tell you that it was painful and eventually we ended up launching as Windows. We had a very unconventional, I guess the best way to describe it, launch of Windows, and again, like I said before, the rest is history. I mean, Windows is now on 90% plus of the computers in the world, so very, very successful brand.
It worked out okay in the end.
It did work out okay.
That's a wild story. That is really, really cool. And I love, isn't it interesting how we so often, you'll run up against some kind of fixed mindset that, that's in place ahead of time, and it takes some time to kind of break those things down and to simplify. I'm curious, and I'd love you to kind of draw on the framework that you alluded to in terms of brand building. Our audience is mostly comprised of people who are kind of individual entrepreneurs, right? They represent a brand, but they're really, in many ways, trying to brand themselves. They're trying to put themselves out there and to create awareness for themselves and for the business that they're building. And so, if you think about some of those concepts that you have put into practice over all these years and kind of bring that back to an individual branding, are there some concepts that you think can be applied there?
Well, look, I'm going to say something that will be very controversial.
All right.
Okay. Social influencers do not build brands.
Okay.
Social, they build revenue. They build sales. So you get a good social influencer.
Sure.
They will help you build sales.
Sure.
But you buy that influence. It's not earned. Okay.
Right. Yep.
If you really want to build a brand, you need to identify who are the opinion leaders within the category. And by the way, in every category, there are opinion leaders.
Yeah.
And that means analysts, different editors, different, and so what you do is once you identify the opinion leaders, then you want to get those opinion leaders to believe in you.
Sure.
Okay. And by the way, there are all, if I had another hour, I would walk you through exactly how we built the Neutrogena brand using opinion leaders, and then how we built the Microsoft brand utilizing opinion leaders.
Yeah. So I totally buy into that. And I think a lot about, you look at, Andrew Huberman and his podcast and what that has done for brands like Athletic Greens and some of these things. So that, there's absolutely huge value in that at play in lots of things today. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you in recent years, you've worked on some things specifically kind of in the health and wellness space in helping to kind of bring some products to market. Is that true?
Oh, absolutely. I'm kind of a health nut
Yeah.
on my own. But yeah, and I'll say health and wellness, and I'll say age management
Yeah.
because and they're very similar.
Sure.
But age management has gotten to be a real science, and
Yeah.
people understanding how to. And by the way, it's not just lifespan. It's not just to expect. It's both lifespan and health span. So
Right.
you don't want to grow old and feeble.
Yeah.
If you grow old, you want to still be active.
Yeah.
And you can do that. We've learned a lot about how to grow old.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I've been heavily involved with everything from light therapy, which is a real interesting thing about how light. I'm not talking wavelengths of light, red, blue, green,
Yeah.
how those things, when you expose the body to these light wavelengths, the effect it has on the body.
Yeah.
And I call it non-traditional medicine because
Right.
a lot of the what I'll call non-traditional medicine is rejected by the traditional medical industry, the
Yeah.
pharmaceutical industry, the traditional Western doctors. But there are some things that you can do that that are definitely have direct impact on your health.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, that's I'm real excited about it. There's a lot you can learn from non-Western medicine. Put it that way.
Totally. So you, I would say again I would say that's kind of a wavelength that connects to a lot of the folks that watch and listen to this show, and there's so much. We live in a world, right, where there's just an overabundance of information and noise and different. There's just a lot out there, and so if you're thinking about you're looking at helping a product to get to market, you're looking at helping a concept or an idea to kind of cut through that noise. How do you approach that in a way that creates resonance?
Well, look at it. First of all, when I talk about opinion leaders, what that means is well, it could be a physician, a certain in the world of skincare, for example, there were two leading dermatologists
Okay.
that all other dermatologists listened to. I mean, they were opinion leaders.
Yeah.
And so rather at the time, I think there were 6,500 dermatologists out there. There was no way as a small company we could reach all of them.
Hmm.
But when we identified, wait a minute, but there's two that really influence the others. And
Sure.
so if we can convince them of our value, and they
Yeah.
in turn will convince others of our value. So it's there and again, every industry has opinion leaders. Now, here's one interesting thing about opinion leaders. It makes it when you build a brand by influencing opinion leaders to have an opinion about you. Uh,
Sure.
that's very, very strong. That's stronger than any other way, and I'll tell you why. Because once an opinion leader gives their opinion and takes your side, in terms of, hey, you should be using X,
Hmm.
you make a mistake, they have a vested interest in helping you fix it,
Yeah.
because their reputation's at stake. It's not just your reputation. So, that's why I say that the strongest way to build a brand, it's a lot harder than advertising. Advertising builds awareness. Advertising doesn't build a brand.
Sure.
Opinion leaders build a brand. Anybody can advertise,
Right.
you know, but taking the time and effort to identify who or what are the opinion leaders within my category. Now that takes a lot of work. It
Yeah.
takes more time,
Yeah.
but like I said, once an opinion leader gives their opinion, they have a vested interest in your success.
Yeah. Yeah. So here's something I'm curious about, right? Like you're
Mhm.
exactly right. And when you're talking about influence as opposed to advertising, those opinions are developed and those connections are created in such a way that it's not a bot relationship. Like there's
Mm-mm.
something that's happening there. And it sounds to me like you have found ways to be successful repeatedly in doing that throughout your career. When you're looking at, especially, kind of putting on that sort of upstart hat, right? Of we don't have a huge budget, right? We're talking about people that are trying to be scrappy. What are some of the things that you've learned along the way to be able to create connection with someone of influence when you don't have a big budget or a huge reputation coming into the table?
Well, again, look at there are there are when you identify opinion leaders, you've
Mhm.
now narrowed down the scope of
Yeah.
what you have to communicate with.
Yeah.
So if you narrow down that scope, I, as a small company, could reach two dermatologists.
Yeah.
I, as a small company, can reach the one or two beauty editors that are highly influential among all the beauty editors.
Yeah.
So you can narrow down what you have to target once you understand who those opinion leaders are, because you don't have to influence everybody. You just
Right.
have to influence them,
Right.
And I mean, it's so funny at Microsoft, people didn't realize, but a huge opinion leader way back, now this is way back, is, at the time the software industry was developing, there was something called computing societies. There was the Boston Computing Society,
Okay.
the Chicago Computing Society. They in all the major cities, you had a computing society,
Okay.
and these were the nerds.
Sure.
These were the guys that had what we called trash 80s. The TRS 80 was a Radio Shack computer. It was a horrible computer, but all the nerds used it,
Yeah.
and so we realized that when we call a newbie, somebody new to the software business,
Sure.
they would be, they wouldn't be influenced by the retailer. They wouldn't be influenced by advertising in the technical. Who they're influenced by is Joe. Joe is a guy in a neighborhood who had a trash 80, who attended the computing society, and the first thing a newbie would say is, "Well, gee, I don't know what to buy, so I think
Sure.
I'll go ask Joe."
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so Joe would then tell them what to buy, and they trusted Joe. Joe's a neighbor.
Yep.
Wow, wow. So what we just said was, well, wait a minute. Let's own these computer societies. Let's go into these computing societies, give them beta software, listen to them, have them give us their opinion, whether or not we listen to it or not. They,
Right.
we ask for their opinion.
Yeah.
We and so what happened was, slowly but surely, within probably 6 to 12 months, all of a sudden these computing societies all over the country were raving about Microsoft.
Yeah.
Because they felt like they had a vested interest in
Yeah.
what our software was, because we asked their opinion. Not hard to do,
No.
but it's time consuming,
Yeah.
takes a lot of work, but you know that was a that so again, you narrow down the scoop. I can't reach every newbie out there. The newbies were, hundreds of thousands of people, but I could reach the computing societies,
Right.
and the Joe, the nerd in the neighborhood, attended those computing society meetings,
Yeah.
and you knew as a newbie, the first thing you do is, hey, I'm going to go ask. I need a new word processing program. I wonder what Joe thinks I should buy.
That's totally, I love that analogy because I think it's really applicable, right? It's so much the same thing that you might think of in a lot of areas today, right? Where it's like, there's a million opinions out there in the world, and I don't have the time, I don't have the aptitude. There's too much conflicting information, whatever it is. What am I going to do? I'm ultimately going to identify and look to somebody who I think I can trust, who I think is knowledgeable, whomever that is, and looking for those people, even on a micro scale, those kind of centers of influence in your little community, in your neck of the woods, in terms of subject matter or whatever it is, and finding ways to become valuable to that person, to, amplify their impact, whatever that is. That's how you kind of create that sort of like self-reinforcing loop of, mutual benefit that allows you to kind of become influential to that person, right?
It's key. And what you've done now as a small to emerging company, you've narrowed the scope
Yeah.
in terms of what you have to do. And so for an emerging, by the way, this is one of the best ways for an emerging company to build their business and build their brand is through they can't afford to buy massive advertising, et cetera.
Yeah.
I'm a huge believer in opinion leaders. I've applied it to every business I've ever been involved in, because it works.
Yeah.
And God, I can go through, so many stories about brands that we've built, and that everywhere, from computer games to, but they got acquired very early because the big companies would see this emerging brand, and they would acquire it. So it's by the way, that's another good way to, if you want to get acquired, get the opinion leaders behind you.
Yeah, there you go. That's really interesting. So I want to pivot a little bit, because one of the other things that I have gotten to learn about from you as we've been getting to know each other is not just the stuff that you're doing in business, but you have a real passion for philanthropy in general. And I know you've got something new that you're working on in the realm of sports that involves our buddy Bob Bodine, and just getting to hear about this was something that I just thought was really, really cool. And so would love to have you share a little bit about this new foundation that you and Bob are working on, and the work you guys are doing today.
Yeah, it's called Gridiron, which is a classic football term, Gridiron Coaches Foundation.org. And gridironcoachesfoundation.org, I'm going to give it to, but I'm going to tell you why I was so inspired to do this. And when I was back in high school, when I was coming to high school, I was a very gifted football player, and I was a very gifted surfer, and those were very different worlds.
Yeah.
And I happened to be getting very influenced by the surfing world. And there was a coach that came along and basically started to guide me, is the best way to say it. His name was Coach House, Mike House. And Coach really, his influence on me drove me in a direction that was the right direction, in terms of what I did, how I can, and he was my high school football coach. And then I went on to play college, but for the last, I don't know, years upon years, he and I would meet once a week for a beer down in Redondo Beach.
Oh,
but he was a major influence on my life, and I'm bringing this up because that's really what Gridiron Coaches Foundation is about. It's so funny. I'll get the quote wrong, but John Harbaugh talks about the value of a football coach and how influential they are in terms of the hearts and minds of our youth. and it's a unique, and again, I don't want to get too much into football, but you go to war. It's like going to war when you're playing football. Football is not fun. I mean, football, you work your ass off for 4 to 5 days a week, and then you go out and you play for a couple of hours,
Yeah.
But but all week you've just gotten your ass kicked, and so it takes us but it's also you have that relationship that gets built with a coach, highly influential. What happens every year, and this is kind of transparent, is that year after year, uh, just I can't even give you a number, but it's a lot of players who have been dedicated to the game since they were 8 years old. It's been their life, it's been their community, it's been their passion. And now they're 19 years old. They're a great safety or running back or whatever. And in a fraction of a second, it's gone.
Yeah.
Because they have what I'll call a participation ending injury. And it's over. If they don't, and now what do I do? I'm very passionate about the game. I've lost my community. I've lost my identity. And so what we're doing is we're creating a channel for guys that want to, we always use the term stay in the game.
Right.
The guys and Bob and I and our partner, a guy named Sean Slocum, who, by the way, he's a Super Bowl winning coach. And his dad, R.C. Slocum, is in the College Football Hall of Fame, College Football Coaches Hall of Fame. Wow. So he got a strong football background. And as you know, Bob recruits athletic directors and coaches. And
he does.
But the ability to get these kids, and we have a screening process that we go through. We want them. We want leaders. We want kids that show leadership skills, and we want kids with high moral standards.
Yeah.
And as we find these kids that have been injured, that want to stand, that have a passion for the game and want to stay in the game, we create a vehicle for them to do that. And so what we do is we provide grants to schools to support these kids to be interns. So consider them coaching interns. And unfortunately, the way the NCAA works is they're limited on the number of paid coaches they can have. Sure. And so they don't want to pay an intern. They've got to pay people that can contribute immediately. Mm-hmm. And so we're able to work around that by providing grants that enable these kids to become coaching interns and learn how to be coaches and allow them to stay in the game. And if Bob and Sean and I do our job right, we're going to be bringing coaches to the game, new coaches of the game, that can be highly influential among these young men that really we can influence in our society. So I think I know that if we do our job right, we'll end up influencing thousands of young kids by giving them the type of coaching that we know can influence them.
Yeah. Wow, that's really interesting. I love that, and I was not so much of a football guy. I was more of a baseball guy growing up. But I reflect on this all the time. A baseball coach I had growing up was, aside from my parents, probably the most influential adult in my life. And I now coach my son's baseball team. And
that's awesome.
I think all the time about just what a privilege and an honor it is to get to have that impact on kids. And, there's so many, whether it's boys or girls, whoever, there are so many kids that are lacking for enough positive, strong, influential adults in their lives who really care about them and are looking to develop them and model for them the right things. And so to connect, giving purpose to these athletes who are having their experience cut short in a way that they never would have hoped for or imagined, but to channel that into something where they can have a positive impact, whether it's with youth, whether it's at a higher level, whatever that looks like, is just really, really powerful.
You think about a kid that from the time he was 6, 7, 8 years old, football has been his life, his community, and within a fraction of a second, it's gone.
Yeah.
He wakes up the next morning and goes, now what do I do?
Yeah.
So it's I experienced it. I injured my neck in football, and I couldn't play anymore. And I did go through some pretty gnarly times trying to figure out, okay, what do I do?
That's a tough deal. Well, so if you're listening, if you're watching, definitely go check out gridironcoachesfoundation.org. Rowland, if people are intrigued by this, if they're interested, if they want to support, if they want to get involved, what can people do to support what you guys are up to?
Well, I really would like people to go to the website, take a look at the website. We have an opportunity for people to make a donation. What we really, really need is corporate sponsors. People, the world of foundations is tough because there are a lot of foundations out there, a lot of ways, and to be honest with you, having corporate sponsors is everything.
Yeah.
So if somebody's listening out there that has a company or related to a company and love to connect with them, to talk to them about being a corporate sponsor. Our foundation is brand new. We launched it right before this season, with the understanding we're coming into the season, the college football season, and beginning in January, February, we'll start identifying the various candidates that we will be making grants to. So it's timing's everything. And I believe we've got I know we have a very powerful message, and I know we can have massive impact.
Yep.
And so I'm going to say to you, if you're talking to me 2 years from now, 3 years from now, I think our foundation will be very well established.
That's so cool. Well, congratulations on getting the ball rolling, and for everyone here, we all know somebody that needs to be connected to this work. And so whether that's somebody who's influential at a big corporation, somebody who's plugged in this business, somebody who needs to know about this because they've recently been somebody who has gone through one of these tough transitions like this, go check out what these guys are up to. And Rowland, I've been riveted by your stories and your background. It's been so fun to learn from you. And I love how you're applying that to such a cool mission going forward with this Gridiron Coaches Foundation. So thank you for doing that.
Well, I got to say that, I've been blessed. I've been given these opportunities, and without having the opportunities, you can't make an impact, and so by the grace of God, everything in my life.
Amen. Amen. Well, Rowland, thank you so much for being here with us today. I really enjoyed the conversation. Make sure you go check out gridironcoachesfoundation.org. Next week, we've got Woody Woodward and Bob Snyder, who have an awesome new book out on how to sell based on personality types. That's just a brilliant, brilliant framework. You don't want to miss that. So thanks again, everybody. It's been another great week of legacy leadership, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again, Rowland.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.